Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Can you hear it again?
Good morning.
Again?
Good morning.
Well, you all seem to be doing splendidly. If I can go away and get myself a nice drink of coffee or something, you all speak perfect English from the sound of that, so I don't need to bother. Now, I want to congratulate you, first of all. So, congratulations, members of the SCEP course. And the reason I want to congratulate you is, as Michael told you yesterday, phonetics can be defined as the science of speech sound. And anyone who learns a language has to learn the sound system of the language. And so, as we say in English, willy-nilly. If you don't know what willy-nilly means, ask your tutor. But what it means is you have to do something. So, willy-nilly, you have to be a phonetician. And you can choose either to be a good phonetician or a bad, incompetent phonetician. And you've come to join us on this summer school course, and I hope we're going to make you all into good phoneticians, and so you've made the right decision. So, congratulations. So there we are. Now, let's move on to consider our first topic today, and I hope this is good. That's wonderful. I'm very frightened of PowerPoint, you see, so I have dreams about the PowerPoint, where it all goes wrong when the students start throwing things at me, so I hope you're not going to throw anything at me if the PowerPoint does go wrong. But we're hoping it will survive. It's on the battery, so if it fades out halfway through, no PowerPoint. Let's hope that's not going to be the case. We have to describe one variety of English. Incidentally, later on in this lecture, you'll have your handout, which is inside your course book. So later on, not in the beginning of it, but later on we'll do two things in the handout. Just warn you about that now. We have to choose one accent of English which we call a model. Sort of English which we aim at. And we choose normally what is known as a prestige model. What does that mean? It means that this is not something which is confined to one particular area of the country. If we were learning French, we'd do the same sort of thing. We wouldn't try to learn the French of, say, Marseille. If we were learning Italian, we wouldn't try to learn the Italian of Naples, or whatever you care to name. If you're learning Chinese, you wouldn't try to learn the language of Shanghai. If you wanted to learn Spanish, you wouldn't learn the Spanish, say, of Murcia. What we do is we try to get a non-regional pronunciation. And we choose a prestige model, sometimes termed an acrolect. Acro means high level. So this is something which we aim at. We don't have to imitate it absolutely and precisely, but it gives us something which is an aim. It gives us something we all know about, and something we can describe, and something which we can go to books for, and we can see that this is described there. We can hear it on CDs, or we can hear it by other audio means. It's a social accent, not a regional accent. The influence is out of all proportion to the percentage of speakers. If you take the percentage of speakers of this particular accent of English we're dealing with, it's probably something like 5%. People vary, but maybe 5% of the population. That's quite a lot of people, actually. 5% of 60 million people is quite a lot of people. But its influence is out of all proportion to that, because it's used in broadcasting, it's used on the stage, etc., etc. The name for it is received pronunciation, and we usually shorten that to RP. It has other names as well. So you sometimes hear it referred to as BBC English. A well-known textbook, a very good textbook, by Peter Roach, also formerly a member of this department. In fact, calls it BBC in English, and the dictionary, which he's taken over from Daniel Jones, who was the first professor of this department, the Cambridge English Dictionary, that refers, he edits that, and that refers to it as BBC English. And Jane Setter, is she here today? Probably not. Jane Setter, who's going to talk to you, I think, this afternoon, she's one of the editors of that dictionary. I personally am not very keen on the term BBC English, the reason being that nowadays, if you listen to the BBC, you find that very often they don't have a deliberate policy of not having received pronunciation speakers. Do you want to hear what RP sounds like? Well, I count myself nowadays as being a speaker of RP, though I didn't start off that way. I had a regional accent which I modified somewhat, but nowadays people don't usually, they ask me constantly, where do you come from? And I tell them, if you pay me a small sum of money, then I'll tell you where I come from. So there we are. Or you could ask Paul Barney where I come from, because he knows, don't you? So there you are. I prefer the term non-regional pronunciation. And this is a term which we invented for a textbook that we wrote. I think it's rather good because it says, as we say, it is the label on the tin. It is what it is. It is a non-regional pronunciation. We don't make any judgments on it apart from that. You might wonder, incidentally, what does received mean? Received means socially accepted. And it goes back to the 18th century was the first time somebody used the term received pronunciation. And it meant it was socially acceptable. So it's always had this sort of snobbish idea to it. And as it was described in books, I think it was often somewhat old-fashioned, even for the time. And if you go on speaking in the way that you find some books tell you to speak, then you'll sound as if you're at least 150 years old. Because some of the books describe this ancient pronunciation as if it's a modern pronunciation of today. The latest term, I say this was this NRP, this was the, I invented that together with my colleagues. I haven't invented many things in my life. I've invented a couple of soups, but my wife says even those aren't much good. So this is my invention, but it's something which I use and I will refer to. But a very common name these days, instead of RP, is to talk about Standard Southern British English. Standard Southern British English, and they abbreviate this to SSBE. So you may hear some tutors referring to SSBE. Non-regional pronunciation and Standard Southern British English, it has a different connotation from RP itself, because if you use these terms, you're really saying that you're talking about the speech, especially the speech of young generation people, and how people who would perhaps formerly have spoken RP, how they speak these days. So it has a much wider, it takes in a much wider number of people than traditional RP would. If I had to put a number on NRP, non-regional pronunciation, or SSB, I would say that it's, depending on how you define it, I would say it's something like 10 to 15% of the population either speak this type of English or are very much influenced by it. I don't know if anybody, the tutors here, would challenge that one, but it does mean that if you speak this type of English, and if you get to pronounce it correctly, then you'll really be able to communicate very effectively. I should say that we don't consider prestige accents, or phoneticians and linguists, they don't consider these to be particularly beautiful or melodious or anything in that way. What we do say about them is that they are easily understood. So this is what we claim. You'll find other people, elocutionists, speech chainers, you sometimes find that they go on about how beautiful received pronunciation is, and you regularly, if you read English newspapers, you'll find letters with people complaining about the fact that particularly young people no longer use RP, and they no longer use it correctly. The curious thing about RP is that until about 20 years ago, nobody outside the world of linguistics really knew what RP meant. Nowadays, for some reason or other, which I do not understand, the newspapers have taken it up. They call it received pronunciation, and you read about it very often. The more the general world talks about received pronunciation, the less linguists and phoneticians seem to want to have anything to do with it. Hence the popularity of the standard Southern British English. In my opinion, a very bad term, because you can say that you could argue with every single word in that definition, because, for instance, British English is not, RP is not really used, NRP, what you say, it's not really used in Scotland, it's used much less in Wales, it's used in Ireland, so it isn't really British in that sense. Is it standard? Yes, that is a better one. Is it Southern? Well, you'll find a lot of people in the north of England who tend to be affected, at least, by RP. But of course, you must realise that British English is not, perhaps to our surprise, the only sort of English which is spoken in the world. You also, of course, have a little country called America. And you have American pronunciation. You have an American pronunciation model. If you turn on the American international stations like Voice of America, you'll hear people using this model, particularly the news announcers. It's much associated in America with radio and television. And because it's associated with radio and television, they call it Network America. So a corresponding term to BBC English, something which is associated with broadcasting and TV. Now, in the United States, indeed, we do have this prestige accent once again. I'm used to all sorts of things, but not to people moaning during my lecture. So it's rather odd. If there's any way of turning off whatever that is, then please do. Alliteration, I've not encountered that before. In any case, my point is that even though you have American English, you also have Australian English, you also have a variety of English spoken in Canada, which is very, very similar to Network American, General American, New Zealand, etc., etc. My point is that all these types of English are very easily understood between educated speakers. Not regional dialects, but educated speakers who speak something close to the prestige model, to the acrolect. They will be able to communicate with each other. And in fact, you can say what you're learning here is a type of English which is readily understood all over the world, and it's unquestionably the most widespread form of international communication that's ever existed. At this stage, I must ask you, can you all hear me? No problems. So if you don't want to hear me, you'll just have to run away, I'm afraid. You're imprisoned. Okay. The next thing that we're going to talk about is transcription. And I'm going to ask you from now on to have a look at your handouts. I'm going to have a look at my handout so that I know where you are. And you'll see there, and this is something which I want to impress on you, that much of what is going up on this screen you will find in your handout. Furthermore, when we come on... Still got that calculation. Furthermore, when we come to this lecture or other lectures that I give, at least, I have asked Michael to put the diagrams on Moodle. So the diagrams will be obtainable online. Now, if you're faced with complicated stuff like this, well, you don't want to copy it all down because it's obviously in the handout. But sometimes there's some quite complicated stuff going up here. You don't need to worry about it because it will be on Moodle and you can get it later on. So don't scream and shout and wave your arms about because it will be there for you to see later. Now, the commonest type of transcription which you're going to encounter, and transcription is very useful. It's a very useful way. You can write things down. You can look words up in pronouncing dictionaries. And even though nowadays most of the pronouncing dictionaries have an audio CD, you can listen to it, check it with the transcription, and make a note of it. It has all sorts of useful things attached to it. So transcription is a very useful thing to have. And phonemic transcription, not phonetic, phonemic transcription, which is the form of transcription which you'll be encountering most often. That is a very nice system to use because it incorporates, in a sense, the phonological rules of the language concerned, in this case, English. It simplifies it, it makes it easier to deal with. It removes the complications. You can put the complications back in, and putting the complications back in will give you phonetic transcription. What do I mean by phonemic? What am I talking about? What we're talking about here is, in fact, the concept of a phoneme, and we'll come to that very shortly. For the moment, have a look at this. I've taken a phrase, an elephant never forgets. I divided this then into syllables. Michael talked to you about the syllable yesterday. And then finally we have words. So the complete thing is the words. So the words can be split, it's going upwards now, into syllables. And then we find that we can have phonemes. Phoneme will be explained shortly. What do we mean by a syllable? Well, it can be defined as one rhythmic pulse. But really, there's no good definition of a syllable. We're really beaten, linguists are beaten by the concept of the syllable to an extent. What we can say in a very rough and ready way is to say that it's a unit which is between the word and the phoneme. So phonemes build up into syllables, syllables build up into words. But we can have a look at the structure of the syllable. What does a syllable consist of? It'll consist of something at the beginning, a speech sound at the beginning, which we call the onset, and then it'll have what is termed a rhyme. Why is it called a rhyme? Because it's the basis of the rhyme in traditional poetry. The rhyme divides into the nucleus, which is always a vowel, or something similar to a vowel, occasionally a syllabic consonant, and what we call a coda, which is the last speech sound in the syllable. Notice, because I know some students get confused about this, notice that nucleus is being used here as the syllable nucleus. Don't confuse it with the intonation nucleus that Michael will be talking about, and other people, Jeff will be talking about later in his analysis of intonation. So what we're talking about, the nucleus as an essential central element. If I put a screen on the board with syllables in it, then you can see much more easily, I think, what they look like. So here we have starting, we have open syllables. That just means there's no consonant at the end. So we have by, for instance, and beg. Don't forget that, as I said, this will be on Moodle later, so write it down by all means to go into your memory, but it's not going to be lost, it's going to be there. Then we have closed syllables. We have here bite and buys. So that does have a consonant element. We call that consonant element, do you remember? The thing at the end is the coda, right. And then we also can build up, and we can have consonant clusters. So we can have here, for instance, we take a word like strands, then you can see here that we've got 3 consonants at the beginning. So 3 consonants as the what? The onset, right. And we also, somebody there was saying coda because she was anticipating, because we also have 3 consonants there. See if we can, maybe if I move myself one down, maybe this is going to be better. Can you still hear me? Okay, right, so let's hope that does better. Right, so let's have a look then at syllable consonant structure in English, and you can see there that we can have as many as 3 consonants in the initial onset position, straw, strands, we've had a couple of examples now, and in the coda position we can have as many as 4, from 0 to 4. To get the 4 you have to go to rather peculiar words like the what were these, cardinal or ordinal? So these will be things like twelfths. I'll make a confession to you. I hardly ever pronounce words like this as twelfths. I find that if I do, my tongue feels sore for 3 days afterwards. Nor do I usually say sixths. Because very often we'll find by a process which we call elision, one of those consonants is removed. So I would probably say twelfths. So I would leave out the F in this particular case. I won't say twelfths, though some people do, but I don't recommend that one to you. But certainly would leave out the F. So these 4 consonant codes, they're rare and they are possibilities, but they're not something which impinges usually. Right, if we then move on to our next discussion point, and that is we've been talking about consonants and vowels and so on. And I've said these we term, do you remember what Michael called them yesterday? Have a term for them? The segments. Okay, so the segments speech. And we can say that these are, well, some of these sounds are of great importance because they are able to change the meanings of words. If we take the set that I've got on the board here, and I think those are also on your handout, you can see here that we can make a difference between the meaning of words with a word initial onset consonant. So you can say pill, bill, hill. I could go on if I wanted to. Till, Jill, dozens, well not dozens of them, but probably quite a lot, probably 10 or so. I've never counted up all the possibilities. In the medial position as nucleus, word medial just means word in the middle, go around in the middle of a word, and then we could have hill, hole, hell. Once again, I could go on, hall, and I could have a lot more words. Like if you've got some there, I'm sure is hall, heel, and so on, all in your handout there. In word final position, hit, hill, hit, him, hip, and so on. And all these are meaningful words in the language. So a convenient way of thinking about the phoneme, and I'm not going to bother you with it, but people have written books the size of the London telephone directory on the theory of what a phoneme is and what it is. We're not really all that interested in that theoretical stuff. If we take a rough and ready way of thinking about the phoneme, then we can say that it's, as on the definition you have here, it's the definition that I've got in here, a member of a set of abstract units which together form the sound system of a given language and through which contrast and meaning are produced. That sounds very good. that will impress people in any pub in London. They will think that you are very intelligent, but you can, to yourself, you can think it's just a sound which in any language, in a particular language, can change the meaning of a word, as we've just seen it can do. That's the rough and ready, that's the way to think about it. The meaningful sounds of language can change the meaning of a word. Right, now, that's not the only thing about phonemes. Because you can see here that you can get different varieties of sound, which are nevertheless part of the same phoneme. Let me take these words, these sounds which we have here, and we can see that if I take, for instance, this so-called clear L here, then if I say a word like leaf, say it after me, leaf, then this is rather different from the way it sounds if I say something like feel. Feel. We call one clear L, and we call this one here in feel dark L. So try imitating them again. Leaf,
Leaf.
and feel.
Feel.
What would happen if I switched them round? Well, the one in leaf would sound something like this. Leaf. Leaf. There are some people I hear who speak like this. I go to Scotland regularly. My wife is Scottish, and I sometimes hear people saying this very dark L in Edinburgh, or near Edinburgh, where we live up there, and it sounds to me sometimes like leaf. I have a lot of difficulties with my life. Sounds often to me as if they're saying, I have a lot of difficulties with my wife. And of course, sometimes these could be exactly the same thing. But the Scottish pronunciation, you also hear it very often in American English, of dark L in initial position. This is not part of VALP, not really part of General Network American either. What would happen if we put it in here? And I turn that L into this, and I say, feel. Feel. Now you can understand me quite easily there, I think, and English people will understand you, but it's not the typical way for it to be pronounced. It can be pronounced in that way. It is, for instance, in Wales, and you'll find there that people will quite often produce very clear L's all the way through. Feel. And people can understand it quite easily. But it does, when you listen to it, it's one of the features of an accent. But we also have another voiceless L. Where do we get that? We get it that follows P or T. P or pup or cup. And sometimes also T in a few words. And so if I say please, listen, please, and clear, then the L there is turned into a sort of sound. And indeed, we call it voiceless L. You'll see we have a symbol for it. I don't know if you can see it on there, but it's this is known as voiceless L, please, clear, and this. What would happen if I put that into those other words? Well, we'd have leaf and feel. I think that you then find it very difficult to understand. But if you listen to English people, listen to it carefully, in fact they have these different varieties. What do we call the varieties? Well, we have it here, the allophones of English L. So allophone, an allophone is a variety of the phoneme. Generally speaking, we can predict where the varieties of L are going to occur. And in the next slide, you'll see how this can be done. So here with the distribution of the allophones of L, once again this is on your handout, then you'll see that it's possible to predict, and you can say that clear L comes before vowels. Dark, we call it velarize, it means the tongue is raised with the back towards the velum. Dark L is before a consonant or pause, and the voiceless fricative L, the friction, hence fricative sound. This then gives you that quality there, which you find after, well, for instance, you get it in clean and you get it in playroom after a cut or a cut. They all go together to produce the complete phoneme of L. A rough and ready way of thinking about the phoneme and the other phones, you can say that the phoneme is a kind of set of variant sounds, normally with rules which enable you to predict their occurrence. Not absolutely true, that last statement. There will be some exceptions. Perhaps your students will, your tutors will tell you about it later. But overwhelmingly, one can predict where these are going to occur. You can also say another thing about it. Where one allophone is, another allophone can't be. As we've just pointed out, if you take the standard language, then we can predict the occurrence of all these particular consonant sounds. You don't need just to do it for consonant sounds. You can also have variant allophones for vowels as well. So I've chosen the consonants to give my examples, but you can get variation with vowels as well. And you can ask your tutor about that if you want. Now, are all languages the same when it comes to phonemes? Answer, depressingly or interestingly, depending on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, the answer is no. Because the basis of a very well-established theory of pronunciation teaching, traditional pronunciation teaching, is contrastive analysis. We do, but people still do a lot of contrastive analysis. If we take English, we have two close front vowels, we'll call them. John Wells is going to tell you about vowels tomorrow. For the moment, we'll just take this label, call them front vowels. So you have a word, for instance, sin, everybody? Sin. And you have a word, seen. We have those two vowels in that particular area of our vowels of English. If we take Spanish, or many other languages, Japanese, for instance, then you find you don't have two vowels there. You only have one. So we'll take Spanish as our example. We do have a word in Spanish, sin. But you don't have any contrast. So if you pronounce it as sin or sin, it doesn't really make much difference to a Spanish speaker. They'll understand what you're saying because there's no potential contrast there. What happens if a Spaniard or Japanese or a French person, Italians, Portuguese, many other nationalities, what happens when they learn English? They have to split up their phoneme and any allophones they have to split it up into two separate phonemes. Otherwise, they'll be misunderstood. And this is one of the most difficult things about learning a language. Our transcription that we talked about earlier, we can now come back and have a look at it and see what types of transcription one needs to use. And you can see, I think this is on the handout over the page, so you don't have to write it all down, but this is to give you an idea of what they are. Types of transcription, the first one isn't really transcription, it's just ordinary writing, so orthography, meaning ordinary spelling. So orthography gives you rock climbers. Phonemic transcription just shows the phonemes. So that gives you exactly the same thing, rock climbers. And that appears to be a very simple way of writing it down. In many ways you could say it's much more complicated, because it expects you to know something about English. To read phonemic transcription, you have to know the phonemes of English and how they're arranged. If you want to see how important this is, then have a look at a transcription of some language which you don't know anything about. So I know if I had to look at Korean, for instance, then I wouldn't probably make a very good attempt at Korean if I didn't know about the phoneme system. So with just given a phonemic transcription, then I wouldn't manage very well. But you all have a knowledge of English, and so you will probably find this transcription easy to get. But we can also have odd phonetic symbols. Now you see the difference between phonetic and phonemic. And phonetic symbols can show allophones. You can either have what's traditionally known as broad phonetic transcription. This has two symbols in it. So we have rock, gives the English r, and a way of showing that with an upside down R. And it also has that little thing that looks like a funny question mark, which is, does anybody know? That's the famous glottal stop. So if I pronounce this, rock climbers, I don't really have to say a k. I can just two Ks and have to say rock climbers, and I wouldn't be likely to do it. I'm much more likely to say rock climbers, and I have that little glottal stop there, which will give the indication to any other English speaker that I'm pronouncing two Ks. You won't see this described in the traditional books. If you've been using some old-fashioned textbooks, they won't mention this, but I will assure you all you have to do is go around, just listen to English people talking in Sainsbury's, in the supermarkets, in the tube, or wherever, and you'll hear these glottal stops all the time. And they're not Cockney or whatever, they're now very firmly a part of non-regional pronunciation, very firmly a part of standard Southern British English, whatever you want to term. Now, if we want to go really mad, we can take the narrow phonetic transcription, and you can have all those things put into get. We've still just got rock climbers, but we have lots of little little marks we call diacritics, so that you can have different ways of showing minute differences. Often this is totally and utterly unnecessary, and there is the old phrase that less is more is less. So very often this just gives you too much information, and in this course we'll hardly ever be using what is known as narrow phonetic transcription. We have ways of indicating which type of transcription we're using, if it's necessary to do so. Phonemic transcription we show in slant brackets. We can also call them slants. Some people call them slashes, which is perhaps a rather unfortunate word to use in English, because it does have another connotation, but nevertheless, slash is used for this. That just means that slanting mark there. I usually call them slants or slant brackets. Square brackets are used for phonetic transcription. And in principle, every time you use a phonetic symbol, even if it's only one, then you should put your transcription in square brackets. That indicates that you're using an allophone as well as the phonemes. And then to show ordinary spelling, orthographic spelling, we use these little arrows. So to indicate if we want to say that, for instance, a particular symbol we're just using the spelling symbol, then we can use those little arrows to indicate it. Now, this is practical. I don't know what devil from hell invented this particular machine. Can you deal with it? Can you right. There's a distinction which we can make, a very general description between types of accent. We talked about, right at the beginning, about general American English, and we talked about RP, non-regional pronunciation, SSBP, whatever you want to call it. Now, one of the major differences between it, in American English, like some other regional accents of English, so like, for instance, Scottish English, Irish English, much of the English is spoken in the west of Britain and southwest of Britain, is rhotic. By that, we mean that R is pronounced wherever it's written. So if we take that first example I've got there, it would be the farmer's carts are in the yard. So all I'm doing now is trying just to speak as I normally do, but putting in R's wherever they're pronounced. So the farmer's carts are in the yard. Try imitating me. The farmer's carts are in the yards. That's all I'm doing. I'm not trying to imitate anything else, just trying to say these verbs. It's very unnatural for me to do it. I have to think very hard to do it. Other accents, most British accents, spoken in England and spoken in Wales. So most of the English in England and Wales, English in Australia, English in most of New Zealand, not all New Zealand, is what we call non-rhotic. And this is where R is only pronounced before a vowel. If you want to know who invented the terms rhotic and non-rhotic, for a lot of these phonetic terms, we have to go back to people like Daniel Jones or people older than him. But here, tomorrow, you're going to see the inventor of the terms rhotic and non-rhotic, as John Wells invented these as terminology. They've been taken up all over the world. Everybody uses them now. And in RP, whatever you want to call it, then it's non-rhotic. Most British English, as I say, is non-rhotic. So this gives you the farmer's carts in the yard. Try to imitate it. The farmer's carts are in the yard. That's very easy for me to say because it's my natural speech. So you can see here that you can get a great difference just by whether you have rhotic or non-rhotic pronunciation. Now what we will be teaching you is non-rhotic pronunciation. So this is what we base the course on. So if you want to be the same as everybody else on the course, then you also, if you have the inclination to pronounce these final R's, then it's probably a good idea not to, at least for this course. It doesn't mean that, pronouncing R's is absolutely dreadful. People will understand what you're saying. But it does mean that it won't sound like the particular model that we're talking about. But you'll be perfectly intelligible. That's not the problem. Okay then. What then can we say? In this introductory lecture, I've tried to deal with pronunciation models, British and American. I've talked to you about the phoneme and the structure of the syllable, and the uses and the usefulness of transcription. And a knowledge of all this basic information will prove essential, I think, not just for this course, but throughout your future careers. Thank you very much.